Have you ever stopped and wondered how much of your reality is, well, yours, and how much of it has been carefully constructed for you? That's what we're diving into today, the architecture of control. We're going to explore how power isn't just about making rules, it's about shaping perception itself. And more importantly, we're going to look at how people can push back from inside these massive, complicated systems.
So here's the game plan. First, we'll meet the architects of reality and look at their toolbox. Then we'll see how something as solid as the Constitution becomes this battlefield of interpretation. After that, things get tactical. We're modernizing a World War II saboteur's guide, exploring this powerful idea of interpretive disobedience. And then, finally, we're going to face the really tough ethical questions that come with resistance. All right, let's jump in.
Okay, first up, the architects of reality. This section is all about the idea that the deepest kind of control isn't about passing laws or giving orders. Nope. It's about engineering what we all believe is true, what's possible, and what's real. To make this real for you, let's talk about the absolutely chilling case of Paul Bennewitz. U.S. intelligence agents basically built a custom-made paranoid reality just for him, feeding him a steady diet of disinformation about hostile aliens and secret underground bases. Now, this wasn't just to mess with him. As the source material says, they spoke a new terrifying reality into existence to neutralize him and discredit an entire area of research. It's a scary reminder of just how fragile one person's reality can be. So, what's the main tool for this kind of reality engineering? It's a concept called hyperstition. Think of it like a self-fulfilling prophecy on steroids. It's a story or an idea that's so potent that once people start believing in it and acting on it, it actually makes itself true. It's like a reality-generating engine that runs on pure belief, and it's designed to bypass all our rational defenses. And believe me, this isn't just some abstract theory. The sources we're looking at point to real-world plans, like Project 2025, as a prime example of this on a huge scale. It's basically a blueprint for engineering a new reality. And the strategy is laid out pretty clearly. Step 1, you dismantle the existing system by replacing civil servants with loyalists. Step 2, you consolidate all that power into the executive branch. And Step 3, you use that centralized power to roll out your own social vision. It's a total top-to-bottom overhaul. Now, to keep that control, another tactic that comes up is engineering what the sources call cognitive chaos. It's basically applying a theory from biology to society. The idea is you keep most people in what's called an R-selected state. They're constantly bombarded with information, always reacting, always distracted. It makes long-term planning almost impossible. Meanwhile, a small strategic minority gets to operate in a K-selected environment. It's stable, it's insulated from the noise, and it allows for deep, long-term thinking. It's a system designed to funnel stability and resources away from the distracted many to the focused few. So, if reality itself can be bent and shaped, what about the fundamental rules that are supposed to govern everything? Well, that brings us to the Constitution. And we're not talking about it as some dusty, fixed document, but as a flexible, malleable battlefield where the fight is all about interpretation. The sources talk about this thing called constitutional drift. It's this growing gap between what the Constitution's words actually say and how it gets used in the real world. And this change doesn't happen through the formal amendment process that the founders set up. No. It happens through something way quieter, way more subtle, reinterpretation. And this slide gets right to the heart of the conflict. You've got two warring philosophies. On one side, you have originalism, which says the meaning is fixed, locked in history, and that's how you keep judges in check. On the other side is living constitutionalism, which says the meaning has to evolve or the document becomes irrelevant. This is the fundamental fight. Where does the meaning come from? The text itself, or the people who get to interpret it? And you can see how this plays out in the real world right here. Look at the Commerce Clause. It gives Congress the power to regulate commerce among the several states. Simple enough, right? But look how wildly the interpretation of just those few words has swung over time. It went from a pretty narrow idea of trade to a New Deal-era decision so broad it meant the government could regulate the wheat a farmer grew just to feed his own animals. It's proof that the exact same words can justify wildly different amounts of power. And that brings us to the critical takeaway here. The moment interpretation becomes the source of meaning, power shifts. It moves away from the document and into the hands of the interpreters. The Constitution's whole purpose as a fixed limit on government starts to erode, and it becomes, as the source warns us, just whatever a majority of 9 people in robes say it is. Okay, so if the system can be re-engineered from the top, how do you fight back from the bottom? Well, that brings us to the countermove. It's a modernized take on a World War II classic, The Saboteur's Guide. The original Simple Sabotage Manual was all about physical stuff, slashing tires, draining fuel tanks, dulling tools. But today's battlefield, it's bureaucratic, it's digital, it's procedural. So modern sabotage is less about breaking machines and more about breaking processes. It's about strategic inefficiency. You could almost call it a kind of social engineering. So let's get into some of these modern tactics, straight from the source material. Instead of refusing to do something, you over-comply. You bury them in a mountain of technically correct but totally overwhelming paperwork. Instead of arguing, you just request endless clarification, always in writing on their own confusing rules. You pretend you don't understand the jargon to make them waste time explaining it in simple terms. You can even tie up their automated systems by asking chatbots questions they can't possibly answer, forcing them to escalate to a real person. Now, the real beauty of this whole approach is that any single act is tiny. It's deniable, it looks insignificant, but when you multiply that by thousands of people all doing it at once, you get what the manual calls a significant cumulative effect. It's not about a single grand act of defiance, it's about creating this constant, steady, persistent drag that just bleeds them of resources, of time, and of morale. You overwhelm them by being insignificant. Okay, so we've moved from the procedural to the intellectual side of resistance, and this is a direct counterpunch to that constitutional drift we were just talking about. This is the practice of interpretive disobedience. The idea is actually really simple, but it's incredibly powerful. You read the founding documents for yourself, you engage directly with what they say, and if an official interpretation, whether it comes from a court, an expert, a politician, whoever, clearly contradicts the plain meaning of the words on the page, you reject it. It's a personal act of reclaiming the text for yourself. And this is not just some, academic game. As this quote argues so powerfully, it's actually a fundamental duty of being a citizen. In a republic, you can't just outsource your understanding of the rules to someone else without giving up a critical piece of your own power, of your role in governing yourself. So the whole point here is that this practice becomes a vital check on power. It's a grassroots resistance to that quiet, slow-motion transformation of government. A shift from a government that's supposed to be constrained by a written document to one that's limited only by the imagination of its interpreters. All right, this brings us to our final and maybe the most difficult section. The resistance dilemma. What happens when the people fighting for freedom start thinking about using the very tools of their oppressors? And this really lands us at the central ethical question of this whole discussion. If the system you're fighting uses manipulation, if it uses psychological warfare, if it has a cynical disregard for what's true to stay in power, can you really fight it with its own weapons? Can you use those same tools without eventually becoming the very thing you were fighting against? The sources warn about this deep paradox. When a resistance movement starts using methods based on manipulation or exploiting people's psychological weaknesses, it runs the huge risk of destroying the very trust and autonomy it claims to be fighting for. You might win the battle, sure, but you could end up losing the war by just perpetuating the same cycle of control and distrust under a different banner. This quote from the psychologist Dr. David Primock just cuts right to the bone of behavioral control. To be able to give someone a reward, you first have to have control over something they want and withhold it. Control, at its core, requires you to create dependency. So for any movement to put itself in that caretaker role, deciding what people need and then controlling their access to it, well, that is an incredibly dangerous step to take. We're going to end on this thought from Norbert Wiener, the father of cybernetics. He argued that the real goal should always be the human use of human beings. And that leaves us with the ultimate question for any system of control or resistance. Does it create a world where people have the information they need to live effectively, to grow, to flourish? Or does it just create a world where they are managed, where their behavior is predicted and their potential is ultimately limited? That is the question we're left with.